Several hours later, they managed to carry the two bodies back. Sora was still in a state of stupor, and Irene invited Conan Doyle for a private chat. Using Tesla's transceiver, Irene gives a call to Conan Doyle while enjoying her bath. She asks him for his opinions on the case, as talking to others will make it easier to sort out his thoughts, and her conjectures may help him too. Conan Doyle begins. Is the murderer really among us? According to Raven, Grey Serpent knew his involvement in the human experiments before the cataclysm had been found out by Joyce, so he killed him to seal his lips, and then he went after Jackal and Raven. However, if the word Ratch wasn't a message written by the victim, then it must be the murderer declaring their motive, but Grey Serpent being the murderer means Ratch would make no sense. Also, according to the scene of Grey Serpent and Raven's deaths, neither could have written that word on the wall. We then learned that the wound on Grey Serpent's back was a fatal heart injury, and the degree of decomposition of his body suggests that he had been dead for several days. Looking at it from a different angle, assuming there's someone who lost everything in the cataclysm and somehow survived, this person who knew everything about it would undoubtedly have a motive for revenge. Both Bronya and Joachim fit this description. However, they both have perfect alibis as they were with him when the murders happened, leading Conan Doyle to suspect some form of paranormal involvement. Einstein is now ready to give Conan Doyle an explanation about the Omega-2 that Welt Joyce had been tracing all these years. She first informs Conan Doyle that Welt used to be the Institute's top secret sample, codenamed Omega-1, before he transferred to Lab 42, and the Omega-2 he had been tracing were the only two successful copies of him. One of the copies being Joffrey. Unfortunately, neither of the copies had Welt's powers, so the Institute decided to dispose of them, but Welt, with the influence of Lab 42, intervened and managed to protect one of them. By the time he acquired the intel that the other Omega-2 was seen in St. Fountain, the cataclysm had already struck. It's believed the cause of the cataclysm had something to do with a certain experiment, yet they couldn't find any records of the details and participants. Irene then enters with a timely knock, and informs them that Sora had awakened. When they arrive at the room where Sora is, they find Joffrey and Bronya beside Sora's bed. Einstein sends them away, and mentions that Bronya used to care for a girl in the orphanage, but that girl didn't make it in the disaster. Einstein then tells Conan Doyle that Joey had been so weak that walking had only become possible recently. Now, on to Sora who, apparently, had just learned of Raven's death. They question her about what she witnessed and she explains that after the blackout, she felt someone grabbed her and knocked her out. When next she woke, she was in an alley, her feet and hands were tied, and her mouth was stuffed with a rag. Though she wanted to escape, her mind was dizzy and all she thought of was sleep. However, Einstein's brief tests revealed that she had not been drugged. When Raven had finally arrived and defeated Grey Serpent, Sora could no longer resist her sleepiness. The next time she woke, she found herself here, and had received news about Raven's death from Bronya. Sora can't remember anything else but a weird dream where she was a girl dressed in blue, and a man whose face she couldn't see holding her hand in the pouring rain. Suddenly, Conan Doyle is struck by violent dizziness. He sees the girl in blue and has a dream about conversations from the past. But why share this memory with him? The girl in blue repeats the nursery rhyme and Conan Doyle is cast out from this dream world. When Conan Doyle awoke, Irene tells him that he froze all of a sudden, abruptly stood up, and opened the window while muttering to himself. Conan Doyle then became lost in thought, trying to piece together the connections. The poem he received in the letter, and the one the girl had been humming were the same. When Welt was on a call, he had also been muttering to himself, meaning he was in a dream when he had been killed. But, who killed Grey Serpent, and what message was the girl in blue trying to send? Then, Conan Doyle remembers what Irene had just told him. His body moved even though he was dreaming. After looking out the window that his body had opened, it seems Conan Doyle had found what he wanted. He confirms whether Sora or anyone she knew used perfume or grew flowers, and then he asked Einstein for a roll of the victims in the cataclysm. In an underground utility room where the three corpses are being held, it's deduced that Raven had been killed by Sora based on the incision on the body, and the position of the scarlet word on the wall. For an adult of regular height, it would not be a comfortable posture, yet the word was written smoothly. There also seems to be a peculiar scent from Grey Serpent's body. Fu Hua asks Conan Doyle if he really thinks the murderer is the Phantom, but Conan Doyle says he's not sure. However, this is what he deduced, based on the known facts, and it seems he is ready to identify the murderer. In a yard filled with the fragrance of rosemary, Conan Doyle confronts Joachim. Joachim asks Conan Doyle if he can afford to waste his time here, but Conan Doyle clutches Joachim's wrist, and claims that Joachim knew who the real murderer was from the very beginning. Joachim remained calm and his body did not quiver until the mention of her presence. Conan Doyle then released Joachim, and told him to follow. In the hall where everyone had been brought with the exception of Hua and the bedridden Sora, Conan Doyle's explanation begins, and he starts with Grey Serpent's motive. He states that Grey Serpent did indeed kill Welt Joyce, but not the other three. Joyce had two lineal descendants. One of them being Joey, and the other, the missing Omega-2. 5 years ago after the catastrophic event, Lab 42 came as the relief effort, but this was a cover for what Joyce was really after, to find out the tests that caused the disaster in Omega-2. Signs led to the fact that the church higher-ups had a hand in the tests, yet no records were found, and according to Raven, no one from the church was directly involved. The tests were led by Jackal, Grey Serpent supplied the materials, and Raven delivered them. The materials being children, but how could this have gone unnoticed? Because back then, there was a place that took in orphans legitimately. At this revelation, Tesla expresses anger toward Joachim, but Conan Doyle continues, saying that Joachim had been kept in the dark until the disaster. Moving on, Joyce's notes indicated that he was on to Grey Serpent, and Grey Serpent, fearing what would happen if the truth of the human experiments is revealed, killed Joyce. Under normal circumstances, Grey Serpent being the murderer of Joyce and Jekyll, and having been killed by Raven at the cost of her life would make perfect sense, if not for the blood writings, since apparently, Grey Serpent didn't kill for revenge, plus there wasn't blood writing near Joyce's body. When Tesla and Einstein found Joyce, Grey Serpent was also there with a knife wound on his back, a fatal wound to the heart. A wound that had rotten so much that it's safe to say he died around the same time as Joyce. The killings were for revenge, and the three victims shared one thing in common, the Forsaken tests 5 years ago. Of all the people here today, who has the best reason to see these three dead? The hall fell silent after the question, but the answer was obvious. Despite Joachim's alibi, there were too many things about him that didn't make sense. He knew what happened 5 years ago, but never said anything to Joyce after joining Lab 42, made Jackal Bronia's governess despite what she did, and was the one that invited them here even though getting their hands on Joyce's legacy would lead to more tragedies. Joachim stood his ground, so it's time to play the trump card. Conan Doyle sighed, put the comlink close to his lips, and, with Hua on the other end, announces that he's going to burn every Rosemary in the yard. Before Tesla and Bronia could speak, Joachim's breakdown came faster. The hysterical scream came from a man of maturity and refinement, but he soon regained calm in everyone's shocked gaze before admitting to being the murderer. Hua then came out of hiding, and as Joachim was about to be restrained, to everyone's surprise, someone small stepped in front of him. It's Bronia, and she reveals herself to be the mastermind. She explains that she used to be grateful to Grey Serpent for bringing her, a lowly child soldier, from the battlefield to the church where for the first time in her life, she felt there was something worth cherishing. However, something wasn't right so she started her own investigations, but before she could confront Sensei, Raven and Grey Serpent pushed her down the stairs. When she woke, she found she had been sent to an institute outside of St. Fountain, and one day, she read in a newspaper that the cataclysm had occurred. Over the years, she had done multiple investigations using all the resources she had access to, and discovered Project Pseudo-Hersher, a project to create powerful Pseudo-Hershers by modifying copies of the first Hersher, Welt Joyce. In the end, the project failed, St. Fountain fell to ruin, and her little brother became a monster that killed their sister. Though Grey Serpent's first death was an accident, she couldn't let him off easy so she controlled him to kill Jackal, and then, had him kidnap Sora to be killed by Raven. As for Raven, Bronia found it ridiculous that she started adopting orphans after everything she had done so she controlled Sora to kill her. However, this isn't the end as Bronia's goal is to one day erase Sheeksel from this world, the behemoth behind the project. Conan Doyle opened his mouth, but failed to say anything as Bronia's obsession with revenge is too intense to be eased by a sense of justice. Bronia then gave a cruel smile, reached out her hand, and gently stroked Joachim's cheek, but calls him Joffrey. The next moment after a deafening roar, the phantom of St. Fountain emerges and vanishes with Bronia and Joachim. Conan Doyle goes over the information in his head, and contemplates about the identity of the phantom until Hua gets his attention. He tells Einstein not to worry as he stuck a tracking device onto Joachim's coat before the assembly. The real problem is the phantom as they have no countermeasures. Tesla tells them not to worry as she had been analyzing the data on the phantom since their encounter, and had made a device based on the results that can interfere with its quantum states. In the next stage, by the St. Fountain railway station, Bronia thanks Mr. Joachim before wondering how Conan Doyle knew about the Rosemary secret. When Joffrey mentions that it might be thanks to Zele, Bronia objects, saying she's dead. Before they knew it, the Conan Doyle party had already caught up to them thanks to Tesla's wild driving. Bronia attempts to run away again, but the Phantom's powers are not working, and without its protection, the Phantom eventually fell down due to their overwhelming attacks. Right as Irene was about to land the fatal blow, a scream was heard along with the sound of metal clashing together. Bronia had blocked the attack, but her scream made Conan Doyle suddenly recall a detail of an intel he had heard from Hua. During the first encounter, when Joachim shielded Bronia with his body, the Phantom suddenly stopped its attack. Conan Doyle yells at Irene to stop, and to his surprise, Irene had held her scythe as if it was what she had expected. Conan Doyle explains that this Phantom is actually the real Joachim, the sensei, and father of the orphans. After Bronia confirms this information, Conan Doyle questions Joffrey. Joffrey explains that he did indeed kill their sister Zele, and although he doesn't remember the experience, he saw the horrible memories stored in this body. The body gave him all of Sensei's memories, experiences, and knowledge, except the memory of the soul swap. Since they answered his question, Bronia wants to know how Conan Doyle found out about the secret of Rosemary. He tells them it was thanks to her sister's hints, and the paradoxical word left on the scene. It occurred to him that maybe the one that wrote the word was trying to reveal the murderer's real motive. When he visited Sora and fell into a dream where he was a strange girl, and after what he saw and heard, he became sure she was trying to send them messages. While in the dream, Irene, Einstein, and Sora all saw that he walked to the window, and started muttering to himself, and if that was a hint, then the girl must be able to control people's bodies in dreams. After he woke up, the first thing he saw was the yard of Rosemary, which reminded him of the first time he dreamed about that girl, which then reminded him that he had smelled that scent several times. From Joachim, in Joyce's room, on Grey Serpent's body, and on Sora after Raven's death. On top of this, Conan Doyle was sure that girl was someone from the orphanage, and found that girl on a roll of cataclysm victims. She is Zélie Valere, Bronia's little sister and best friend in the orphanage. However, Bronia doesn't believe this, as what Zélie has done is too contradictory. Conan Doyle replies by saying it's because she deeply loves her siblings that she's helping them, while hoping someone would rescue them from this path of revenge. Bronia, with the belief that Conan Doyle is right, reveals a rosemary in her hand and calls upon Zélie to help carry out her revenge. The rosemary dissolved into red and black hues, and for a moment, a red figure emerged behind Bronia and their figures overlapped, consuming her with rage. Nonetheless, the fight ended in her loss. The raging fury controlling her had vanished, and the rosemary in her hand withered into sear remains. The rain kept pouring down as Bronia weakly looked up, and her eyes widened in surprise. For so many years, blinded by intense hatred, Bronia had treated this figure as a tool for revenge, but only now, have finally realized that Zélie had always been with her. Joey has known this all along as he had been looking after the rosemary, although Zélie cannot talk to them. Tears ran down Bronia's face for the first time since indulging herself in her desire for vengeance, and then she saw an unreal image. A cultivated man and a girl in blue leaving hand in hand. The man looked back, waved at her with a comforting smile, and the two figures said their farewells before fading away in the white light. The sear flower remains in her hand had gone with the wind, the phantom was no more, and Bronia wailed miserably. As it's not part of his job, Conan Doyle states that he'll let Joyce decide what to do with the culprits. Upon hearing this, Joyce reveals himself and asks what gave him away. Conan Doyle tells him that while there were clues that made him suspect that Joyce was still alive, what cemented it was Einstein's bad acting. The way Einstein infuriated Raven, and how she loathed to talk about the Phantom and Cataclysm yet still provided key clues. Joyce is then questioned about his situation. Joyce says he doesn't know, and explains that the original soul of his current body never existed. The only Omega-2 is Joffrey, who now resides in Joachim's body, while this body never woke up despite having normal vital signs. As for the two culprits, Joyce decided not to punish them. It's the end, and, after seeing Joyce express gratitude towards Irene, Conan Doyle recalls that he never managed to figure out the relationship between them. Back to the beginning, after Conan Doyle had walked up those steps and opened the door, he is now discussing with Irene. Lab 42 had seceded from Sheiksel, and allied with the North American branch to form Anti-Entropy, and the orphans Raven adopted have been taken in by Joyce. Still, Conan Doyle has no clue how the possessions and soul swap were possible. Also, as Joachim and Zélie were leaving in white light, Conan Doyle thought he saw Joachim express gratitude towards Irene, who in turn, waved back despite not facing them. Suddenly, the conversation takes a turn. Grey Serpent wasn't Grey Serpent, the Phantom wasn't the Phantom, Joachim wasn't Joachim, and even Joffrey wasn't Joffrey. Then perhaps, Irene Adler wasn't really Irene Adler, and Conan Doyle wasn't really Conan Doyle. Then, after referencing Sanguine Knights,
他意识映射的过于频繁，人格里混入了太多不属于他的东西，这样下去，迟早有一天。
我知道，他也知道，但这就是他自己选择要做的事情。反倒是你，能够悄无声息地侵入修伯利安，还对这个人的情况了如指掌。你和我以及这艘船上的其他人都不一样，我能感觉得到。倒不如说，比起我们，你和他的存在才更加近似。你究竟是什么人？
关心大人，我记得我们似乎早有约定，我会负责把他带回来，但是相对的，请您不要过问我的身份和来历。
哼，装神弄鬼的女人。
而且我从一开始就说过，我叫丽塔，丽塔洛斯威瑟。
哼，这个房间暂时就留作你在剑上的休憩之所。他若是醒了，让他休息一下就来剑桥见我。我有很多的话想要和他好好聊聊。
看来，你对我出现在这里似乎并不感到惊讶。意识映射并不是那么单纯的能力，你最好不要再使用下去了。映射期间，你将完全同步对方的人格记忆，这份庞大信息所带来的负担，在映射解除后根本不可能做到毫无残留。残留的杂质越多，你的自我认知就会越来越薄弱。
Captain seemed to have wanted to say something, but says nothing, and leaves to meet Coming on the bridge. After Captain had left, Rita asks Loki if he would have recognized her if she put on this dress, and changes into a dress she wore in the past.